A note before the script. The framing, at 68, Steve Harvey divorced his wife immediately after this, is not accurate. Steve Harvey, now 68, has been married to his current wife, Marjorie Harvey, since 2007. There is no confirmed recent divorce. What's true is that divorce rumors about Steve and Marjorie have resurfaced repeatedly over the years, including as recently as this year, and both have publicly and firmly denied them. The genuinely dramatic, well-documented divorce in Steve Harvey's life happened in 2005, his split from his second wife, Mary Shackelford. And that's the story most of the viral clips about him are actually drawing from, often stretched or dramatized. Below is a fuller, fact-checked script built from verified reporting and Steve Harvey's own public interviews, clearly separating what's confirmed from what remains rumor. Steve Harvey has spent the last 2 decades building an image most people would recognize instantly. The sharp suit, the booming laugh, the man who seems to have an answer for everything from relationship advice to game show trivia. He hosts Family Feud, runs a syndicated morning radio show heard across the country, has authored New York Times bestsellers, and carries an estimated net worth north of $200 million. But almost none of that existed for the first half of his life. Before the empire, there were 2 failed marriages, a stretch of literal homelessness, a tax debt that ran into 8 figures, and one 24-hour stretch that Steve Harvey himself has described as the hinge point of his entire life. This is the real, documented version of that story, not the dramatized one currently circulating online with a fabricated divorce headline attached to it. Steve Harvey was born Broderick Stephen Harvey on January 17, 1957, in Welch, West Virginia, the youngest of 5 children born to Jesse and Eloise Harvey. The family later moved to Cleveland, Ohio, where Steve grew up. As a child, he struggled with a stutter severe enough that it shaped how he interacted with other kids, something he's spoken about publicly as a source of real insecurity growing up, long before anyone would know him as one of the most confident voices on television. After high school, Harvey spent 2 years at Kent State University before leaving to take a string of ordinary jobs, factory work, carpet cleaning, boxing, even a stint delivering mail. For a while, he settled into work as an insurance salesman in Ohio, which is the job he held in 1981 when he married his first wife, Marcia Harvey. Steve and Marcia had 3 children together, twin daughters, Brandy and Carly, and a son, Broderick Jr. On paper, it looked like a stable, ordinary family life. Underneath it, Steve was chasing something else. In 1984, he won an amateur comedy contest, and by 1985, at 28 years old, he made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He quit his insurance job and decided to try comedy full-time, putting more than 120,000 miles on his car chasing gigs across the country in that first year alone. That decision detonated his marriage and his finances at the same time. For roughly 3 years, Steve Harvey was functionally homeless. He lived out of his 1976 Ford Tempo, kept perishable food in an igloo cooler in the back seat, and washed up wherever he could: hotel bathrooms, rest stops, gas station sinks. He said he survived on as little as $50 a week, some weeks living almost entirely on bologna sandwiches, and that roughly 75% of whatever he did earn went straight to Marcia and their children, leaving him almost nothing to live on himself. In interviews years later, he's described sitting down and crying in a hotel bathroom during that period, at what he calls the lowest point of his life, and has said the only thing that kept him going was a kind of internal voice telling him to keep pushing, that if he kept going, life would eventually take him somewhere he'd never been. The strain of that instability, Steve's constant travel, the financial pressure, the distance it created, ended the marriage. Steve and Marcia divorced in 1994 after 13 years together. Even before the divorce from Marcia was finalized, Steve had already crossed paths with a woman named Mary Shackelford. They first met around 1989 or 1990. Nothing happened between them at the time. Steve moved on, and in 1996, 2 years after his divorce from Marcia was final, he married Mary. The couple had one son together, Winton, born in 1997. The years that followed were, professionally, the moment Steve Harvey's career finally broke wide open. In 1997, he joined Cedric the Entertainer, D.L. Hughley, and Bernie Mac on the Kings of Comedy tour, which went on to become the highest-grossing comedy tour in American history at the time, reportedly pulling in around $18 million in its first year and roughly $19 million in its second. In 2000, Spike Lee turned the tour into a concert film, the original Kings of Comedy, made for around $3 million and eventually earning close to $38 million at the box office. That same period saw Steve land his own sitcom, The Steve Harvey Show, on the WB, where he played a former funk musician turned high school music teacher, a role that ran from 1996 to 2002 and made him a household name well beyond the comedy club circuit. In September 2000, he added another pillar to his career, launching The Steve Harvey Morning Show, a nationally syndicated radio program he still hosts today. By any outside measure, this was Steve Harvey's breakout decade. But according to Mary, serious problems in the marriage had surfaced far earlier than the public ever knew. She has said she began finding what she believed was evidence of infidelity as early as their second wedding anniversary. Whatever the full truth of individual claims on either side, the marriage did not survive. Steve and Mary Shackelford divorced in 2005 after 9 years together. Unlike his first divorce, which stayed largely private, the split from Mary became one of the more prolonged and public legal battles of Steve Harvey's life, one that, in various forms, has resurfaced in the press for nearly 20 years since. In the immediate aftermath, Steve gained custody of their son, Winton, a decision Mary has said devastated her and that she has continued to describe as unjust in interviews and public statements for years afterward. Financially, reporting from the time put the cost of the divorce settlement to Steve in the tens of millions of dollars. Mary, for her part, spent years publicly insisting she'd been left with nothing, evicted from her home, stripped of her wealth, cut off from financial stability. A Texas court later directly disputed that characterization, finding that she had in fact received substantial alimony along with several homes as part of the settlement. Steve has separately described a real financial crisis of his own during this same window, one distinct from any specific claims in Mary's public statements. In multiple interviews given years later, including a widely discussed 2023 appearance on the Club Shay Shay podcast and an earlier 2022 appearance on Earn Your Leisure, Harvey laid out what happened. Not long after his divorce, his longtime accountant died. A colleague of that accountant discovered a stack of Steve's tax filings from the previous 7 years lying on the floor of the office, signed, with checks still stapled to them, never actually sent to the IRS. According to Harvey, the accountant's firm had been pulling the exact matching amount out of his bank account as though the checks had cleared, while quietly keeping the money and never filing the paperwork. The result? Harvey said he discovered he owed the IRS roughly $22 million in back taxes, a debt he has also referenced as being closer to $25 million in some retellings. He's also said that by the time this came to light, whatever savings he'd built up were largely gone. In his account, funds were moved out of shared accounts before the divorce assets were split, leaving him to face the tax bill essentially alone. Whatever the precise sequence, Harvey has been consistent on one point. At the moment all of this converged, he looked at his own bank balance and found $1,700 in it. He's told that detail on more than one podcast, sometimes tying it to the exact week he was about to sign a new syndicated radio contract in New York, the deal that, in his telling, arrived just in time to keep him afloat. Over the following 7 years, he says he paid the IRS roughly $650,000 a month to work off the debt, while also covering his ongoing taxes and living expenses. Here is the part of the story that is both genuinely dramatic and well documented, straight from Harvey's own retelling and interviews over the years, and it's almost certainly the real event that inspired the more exaggerated, fictionalized versions now circulating online. The day after his divorce from Mary was finalized, Steve Harvey's bodyguard interrupted him with a phone call he almost didn't take. On the other end was Marjorie Bridges, a woman Steve had first met around 1990 but never dated. At the time they'd met, he was still married to Marcia. Life simply moved them in different directions, and Steve went on to marry Mary instead. Marjorie, meanwhile, had gone on to marry and later divorce someone else. When Steve learned, in that call, that Marjorie was no longer married, he didn't wait. He flew to see her almost immediately. Marjorie, however, has said she was clear about her own boundary from the start. She wasn't interested in getting involved with a married man. Once Steve told her his divorce had just been finalized, she reportedly still took time, by some accounts around a month, to independently confirm that it was true before she let the relationship move forward. Once it did, the two moved toward a life together relatively quickly given the circumstances, and Steve has said the moment he saw her again, he made a private decision not to let her go a second time. They married in June 2007. The marriage to Marjorie brought two families together under one roof. Steve came in with 4 children, Brandy, Carly, Broderick Jr., and Winton. Marjorie brought 3 of her own, Morgan, Jason, and Lori, all of whom Steve later formally adopted. Blending the two families wasn't seamless, and Steve has talked about that honestly rather than glossing over it. In a 2021 conversation with former NFL quarterback Cam Newton, he recalled being told outright by one of his wife's kids, early on, that he wasn't their father, a moment he's framed since as part of the real, unglamorous work of stepping into a role nobody automatically hands you. He's described the process as one that required patience and consistency rather than any shortcut, and has since spoken about his blended family, particularly his adopted daughter Lori Harvey, with visible pride as they've grown into adults with their own public profiles. In 2016, reflecting candidly on his second marriage in an interview with People, Steve said he had married Mary for the wrong reasons, namely loneliness, and took ownership of the relationship's failure rather than placing the blame solely on her. The story didn't end with the 2005 divorce being finalized. More than a decade later, in May 2017, Mary Shackelford filed a lawsuit against Steve seeking $60 million in damages. The filing was unusual even by celebrity lawsuit standards. Alongside claims like intentional infliction of emotional distress and conspiracy against rights, it used the phrase soul murder to describe the psychological toll she said the divorce had taken on her, and alleged she had become suicidal and had to self-medicate to cope with the aftermath. Steve's legal team responded forcefully, calling the lawsuit meritless and frivolous, and stating they intended to defend against it aggressively. A judge ultimately dismissed the case, not on the merits of the underlying claims, but on jurisdictional grounds, ruling that any such dispute belonged in Texas, where the original divorce had been finalized, not in California, where Mary had filed it. That wasn't the last of it. In the years around the lawsuit, Mary also released a series of YouTube videos publicly accusing Steve of falsifying documents, violating her civil rights, and never fully honoring their original settlement. Videos in which she also alleged, for the first time publicly at that scale, that Steve had been unfaithful with Marjorie while still married to her. A Texas judge subsequently reprimanded Mary over some of those public statements, finding she may have violated a gag order tied to the original divorce settlement, and at one point ordered her to remove certain videos and temporarily barred her from discussing the litigation with media. Around the same period, Marjorie Harvey retained her own attorney and pursued a defamation claim against Mary over the other woman accusations, saying in a statement that she couldn't stand by and allow her family to be maligned. While all of this was unfolding in the background, Steve Harvey's actual career kept climbing. He became the host of Family Feud in 2010 and later Celebrity Family Feud, transforming a decades-old game show into appointment viewing largely built around his own comic timing and rapport with contestants. He hosted the Miss Universe pageant starting in 2015. Including the now famous night, he mistakenly announced the wrong winner on live television, a moment he later turned into part of his own public brand of self-deprecating honesty. He built a publishing career around relationship advice, most notably with Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, which spent 64 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and was later adapted into a hit film franchise. He added additional television projects over the years, including the courtroom comedy series Judge Steve Harvey, and became one of the most watched personalities in American media, by some estimates reaching close to a fifth of the U.S. television viewing public annually across his various shows. By the time he was discussing his old $22 million tax debt on podcasts in 2022 and 2023, it was very much a rearview mirror story. Harvey's net worth is now estimated at more than $200 million, built across radio, television, publishing, and a range of business ventures. Despite the fact that Steve and Marjorie have now been married since 2007, closing in on 2 decades. Their marriage has never fully escaped public speculation. Rumors of affairs, an alleged 9-figure divorce settlement, and even outright claims that Marjorie had already left him have circulated online periodically for years, often tied to nothing more than unverified social media posts or tabloid claims with no-named sources. Steve and Marjorie have addressed the rumors directly and publicly more than once, at one point poking fun at a fresh round of speculation together at a public event, joking on camera about leaving each other while clearly still very much together. That cycle repeated again earlier this year, with a fresh wave of claims, including talk of an alleged $200 million settlement, that both Steve and Marjorie firmly denied. As of now, there is no credible, confirmed reporting that Steve and Marjorie Harvey have divorced. The pattern is a familiar one in celebrity media. A real, complicated history involving 2 actual divorces gets treated as evidence that a third one must be imminent, and clip-based content built around loose or fabricated claims tends to outperform anything grounded strictly in fact. Strip away the invented dialogue, the fabricated headline, and the conflation of 2 very different divorces, and the real story here doesn't need embellishment. Steve Harvey went from a stuttering kid in Welch, West Virginia, to sleeping in a Ford Tempo on $50 a week, to a first marriage that couldn't survive his decision to chase comedy, to a second marriage that ended in one of the most publicly bitter divorces in celebrity history, to a moment, by his own account, literally the